I never believed in curses. They were just stories, passed down from old men whose hands were too tired to walk the land anymore. To me, they were tales, nothing more than whispered warnings meant to keep us in check. I always laughed them off, as did many of the younger men in the village. We had dreams bigger than these small stories. The village of Omogu, where I was born and raised, sat nestled between thick, towering forests and endless farmlands. It was an ordinary place, where life moved slowly, and traditions ruled. But while others held to the old ways, I couldn't help but feel they were shackles, weighing down those of us who wanted something different. I was Nkem, the younger son of a farming family, born into the predictable rhythm of planting and harvesting, listening to the same rituals and hearing the same superstitions over and over again. My father often reminded me of the importance of respecting the earth, the ancestors, and the spirits that inhabited our world. Life comes from the land, he would say, his weathered face serious. Mop the land, and it will take back what it has given. But like any rebellious youth, I ignored him. What was the land going to do to me? It was just dirt and trees, after all. That is why, on the day of the village's annual harvest festival, I wasn't paying attention when the chief priest began his speech, reminding us once again of the ancient curse that had been placed on the land. The land is sacred, the priest intoned, his voice booming through the crowd gathered in the village square. Those who mock the earth will see their shadows rise against them. It is the way of things. I rolled my eyes, nudging my friend Obiora beside me. He chuckled, shaking his head. Like me, Obiora had little patience for these superstitions. We had better things to do than listen to stories about shadows coming to life. I'm tired of these old fables, I whispered to him. Every year, it's the same nonsense. Yeah, he agreed. You'd think they'd have a new story by now. The two of us laughed under our breath, careful not to draw attention. After all, the village elders took these traditions seriously. I didn't believe in curses, but I wasn't foolish enough to provoke them in front of the entire village. Yet, as the day went on and the celebrations continued, something inside me grew restless. I wanted to prove that I was above these old stories, that I wasn't afraid of the threats they carried. I wanted to show them all that the curse was nothing more than a myth. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped lower in the sky and cast long shadows across the village square, I found myself with Obiora and Uche, another friend of ours. We had moved away from the festivities and sat by the edge of the river, where the air was cooler and the noise of the village faded into the background. I can't believe they still expect us to believe this curse nonsense, Uche said, skipping a small stone across the water. Shadows coming to life. It's ridiculous. It's just a way to keep people in line, I replied. The elders use fear to control us. But I'm not afraid. Obiora grinned. You know, if you really don't believe it, you should prove it. What do you mean? I asked, narrowing my eyes at him. I mean, do something to mock the curse, Obiora continued, his voice daring. If nothing happens, it'll show everyone that these stories are just lies. I hesitated, glancing around to see if anyone was watching us. The village square was far enough away that no one could hear our conversation, but still, something about the suggestion made me pause. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a lingering sense of unease. I didn't believe in the curse, but I knew how seriously the villagers took it. I don't need to prove anything, I said, crossing my arms. Come on, Nkem, Uche chimed in. Are you afraid? Maybe there's some truth to the curse after all. That was all it took. The challenge had been issued, and I wasn't one to back down. Fine, I said, standing up. Watch this. I walked over to the field, where the crops grew tall and lush, ready to be harvested. Without hesitation, I bent down, grabbed a handful of soil, and threw it into the air. The wind carried the dust away, scattering it across the land. Spirits of the land, I called out, my voice dripping with mockery. Come for me. Let my shadow rise and take me, if you can. Obiora and Uche burst into laughter, and I joined them, feeling a rush of adrenaline. I had done it. I had mocked the curse, and nothing had happened. I was untouchable. As we walked back to the village, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of triumph. But beneath it all, there was a flicker of doubt, a whisper of fear that I tried to ignore. That night, as I lay in my bed, staring up at the ceiling of my family's hut, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. It was an irrational thought, I told myself, born from the day's events. I had mocked the curse, and now my mind was playing tricks on me. I rolled over, trying to get comfortable, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. My shadow, cast by the flickering light of the oil lamp, stretched across the wall, moving as I did. But then, for just a split second, it didn't. I froze, my eyes fixed on the shadow. It had moved with me, just as it always had. But for that brief moment, it had lagged behind, delayed by the smallest fraction of time. It was nothing, I told myself. A trick of the light, perhaps. Shadows couldn't move on their own. They were just the absence of light, the result of an object blocking the sun. Still, I couldn't shake the image from my mind. I lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the night, the rustling of the wind through the trees, the distant call of an owl, and trying to convince myself that everything was normal. But deep down, I knew something had changed. The next morning, I woke up early, hoping that the events of the previous night had been nothing more than a bad dream. I went about my day as usual, walking in the fields with my family, but I couldn't help but notice that my shadow seemed different. At first, it was subtle. I would move my arm, and the shadow would follow, but just a fraction of a second too late. It wasn't enough to be noticeable to anyone else, but to me, it was clear. My shadow wasn't acting as it should. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that I was imagining things. But as the days passed, the strange occurrences grew more frequent. Sometimes, I would catch my shadow moving when I wasn't. I would turn my head, and out of the corner of my eye, I would see it shift, just slightly, as if it were watching me. I confided in Obiora and Uche, but they laughed it off. You're just spooked because of what the priest said, Uche said, shaking his head. Stop letting those old stories get to you. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Every time I looked down, my shadow seemed more and more out of sync with me. It was no longer just a delayed movement, it was something else entirely. It felt alive. After several sleepless nights, I decided to visit the chief priest. I wasn't ready to admit that I believed in the curse, but I needed answers. Maybe he could give me a charm or a prayer, something to stop the strange things that were happening to me. The chief priest's hut was on the outskirts of the village, surrounded by tall, ancient trees. As I approached, I felt a chill in the air, as if the land itself was holding its breath. When I entered the hut, the priest was sitting cross-legged on the floor, his eyes closed in meditation. He didn't look up as I approached, but I could feel his awareness of my presence. I warned you, Nkem, he said, his voice low and steady. The land does not forget. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I didn't mean any harm, I said, my voice shaking. You mocked the spirits, the priest interrupted, his eyes snapping open and locking onto mine. You disrespected the land that gives us life. And now, your shadow will come for you. I felt a cold knot of fear form in my stomach. What can I do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The priest studied me for a long moment, his eyes dark and unreadable. There is one way, he said finally. You must return to the sacred grove where the curse was first placed. There, you must offer a sacrifice to the spirits. A sacrifice? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. What kind of sacrifice? The priest's gaze was piercing, as if he could see into the depth of my soul. Something of great value to you, he said. Something that represents your pride. I felt a surge of anger and fear. My pride. How can I sacrifice that? The priest shook his head. You have no choice, Nkem. The curse is real, and it will not stop until your shadow has consumed you. I left the hut, my mind racing. Sacrifice my pride. I wasn't sure what that even meant. But I knew one thing for certain, I had to do something, or the curse would destroy me. That night, I couldn't sleep. My shadow seemed to move constantly now, shifting on the walls of my hut, twisting into strange shapes and flickering like a flame. I lay in bed, watching it, feeling a growing sense of dread. In the early hours of the morning, as the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the walls, I saw it. My shadow moved. It wasn't just a delayed reaction this time. It moved on its own, separate from me, shifting across the floor like a living creature. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadow stretched out, growing longer and darker, its shape twisting into something monstrous. I scrambled out of bed, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The shadow was no longer mine, it was something else entirely, something that had broken free from me. Without thinking, I ran. I burst out of my hut and into the village, the early morning light casting long shadows across the ground. But as I ran, I could feel it, my shadow, following me, chasing me, haunting me. It was faster than me, faster than anything I had ever seen. No matter how quickly I moved, it was always just behind me, reaching for me with long, inky tendrils. I stumbled into the village square, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The villagers had already begun their morning routines, but they stopped and stared as I collapsed on the ground, panting and covered in sweat. What's wrong with him? Someone asked. I don't know, another voice replied. He looks like he's seen a ghost. I had seen something far worse than a ghost. I knew what I had to do. The priest had told me that the only way to stop the curse was to make a sacrifice, and now there was no other choice. With trembling hands, I gathered the one thing I held most dear, my mother's golden anklet. It was the only thing she had left me before she died, the only possession I had that truly mattered. It was my pride. I made my way to the sacred grove, my heart heavy with fear and regret. The trees seemed to close in around me as I entered the clearing, the air thick with the presence of the spirits. I knelt before the ancient tree at the center of the grove, my hands shaking as I placed the anklet on the ground before me. I ask for your forgiveness, I whispered, my voice cracking. I was wrong. I disrespected the land, and I mocked the spirits. Please, take this offering and lift the curse. For a long moment, there was only silence. The wind rustled through the trees, and the shadows danced across the ground. Then, a voice echoed in my mind, a voice dark and cold. The price is too small. I gasped, my eyes snapping open. The shadows around me began to swirl, growing darker and more menacing. My offering had not been enough. The shadow that had haunted me for days now stood before me, towering and twisted, its form monstrous and unnatural. It lunged toward me, its arms outstretched, ready to consume me. I fell to my knees, my heart racing, my mind filled with terror. The shadow moved closer, its inky form enveloping me, and I could feel its cold presence wrapping around my soul. I was paralyzed, unable to move, as the darkness closed in. But just as I thought it was over, a soft rustling sound filled the air. The leaves on the trees began to move, swaying gently in the wind, and a warm, golden light appeared at the edge of the grove. The chief priest stepped into the clearing, his staff raised high, the golden light radiating from it, like the rising sun. "The spirits have heard your plea," he said, his voice calm and steady. "But they demand more." "What more can I give?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I've sacrificed everything." The priest shook his head. "No, Nkem. You still have your pride. You must give that up. You must humble yourself before the spirits and before your people." Tears filled my eyes as I realized what he meant. I had to admit my mistakes, not just to the spirits, but to the entire village. I had to humble myself in front of the people I had mocked. It was the only way. With the priest's guidance, I returned to the village square, my heart heavy with shame. The villagers gathered around, their eyes filled with curiosity and confusion. "I was wrong," I said, my voice shaking. "I disrespected the land and the spirits. I mocked the curse, and now it has come for me. I ask for your forgiveness." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, one by one, the villagers stepped forward, placing their hands on my shoulders, their faces filled with understanding. "We forgive you," they said. As their voices filled the air, I felt a strange warmth spread through me. The shadow that had haunted me for so long began to fade, its darkness dissolving into the light. I had humbled myself, and the curse was lifted. I returned to the village a changed man. The curse had been lifted, but the lessons it taught me would stay with me forever. The villagers never spoke of what had happened, but the story spread. It became a cautionary tale, passed down from generation to generation, a reminder of the power of the land and the importance of respecting our traditions. As for me, I never mocked the curse again. I had learned the hard way that some stories are more than just words. Some stories are alive,